Thank you to the Orbis Cyber Site team, especially Rishi, for giving me this honor of being one of the speakers in the Cyber Site series in this challenging times. So to start off, I think this has been one particular situation where the rules, regulations, and the realities have been constantly changing. So want you to recognize that whatever I say can become quickly out of context, and I guess you need to apply your own judgment and then respond to whatever is the local regulations and whatever. So this is an important thing to consider in this particular instance. So my talk is largely around this theme. All of us have are kind of challenged by this pandemic. I just want to take this stance that you should never let a serious crisis go to waste, to see how we can come out of this better than what we went in. So that's going to be the theme of my presentation. So when we look at any organization, there are different lenses that one can apply to kind of look at an organization. And then one useful way is to look at it from the supply and demand perspective. Because every organization is organized to supply goods or service, and like in our case, eye care. And for that, we require facility, buildings, equipment, technologies. Now you need the staff with the right skills and the right attitude. You need the right kind of operating systems, processes, protocols, all of that to produce good quality services. And for all of this, one requires finances as well to keep things going. And then we also need to have processes for the demand side, to create awareness, to create access, to remove barriers, make our services affordable, retain patients and so on. There's a whole lot of work that happens on the demand side. So I kind of use this paradigm to kind of see what are the stress points that happens in this situation. You will recognize that on the supply side, pretty much everything is in place. In the sense, the hospital buildings, equipment, everything exists. Not everything, and I think for many of those on this webinar, finance may be one of the stress points. But otherwise, the staff are around there, your protocols, your policies, your rules, all of them are pretty much in place. So this is just to recognize that where the focus needs to be. Even though finance is probably what we look at as the most critical point, I think there are other aspects that we need to also address, which I will quickly transition to. On the demand side, we're going to have issues around access because I think for most of the country, there is still no public transportation. And most of our customers or patients depend heavily on public transportation to come. And even those with private transportation, there are now a lot of hurdles in movement, getting permits and so on. And of course, outreach is out of the question now. And my guess is that it will be out of question for several more months to come. So broadly, these tend to be the stress points that we recognize. And even though finance is a challenge, but I think some of the other areas would be staff retention and engagement. Because with revenues drying up a little bit in the month of March and probably completely in the month of June and into May, I think many of us will be stressed even to pay salaries. So there, I think the only option is to work out some mutually agreed upon arrangements. Either you're able to pay them or you defer them, or this has got to be very much locally done. And then we need to figure out a way of engaging the staff. Vast majority of them are on the clinical routine. So given that when that is not happening, how do we keep them engaged with the organization? That's the big challenge, I would think. Probably the most significant challenge in which I'm spending most of the time would be on capacity reduction. Because of the norms that have come in of social distancing and decontamination protocols between patients and so on, we just cannot see the same number of patients that we are used to seeing. So this is what is going to have a lasting impact on the organization if you don't figure out a way of coming out of this conundrum. And that's going to be a big part of my presentation. Then on the finances, I think the essential challenge is having the cash flow. That is making sure we have enough money coming in to meet the requirement of money going out towards salaries or towards purchases and so on. And of course, we need to keep the patient care going. And in this, I particularly want to draw the attention to staff retention. Because all of us will recognize our HR is the most critical and also the most valuable resource, because every organization, big or small, including hospitals like Aravind, where we employ 5,000 odd staff, our kind of real limitation comes to HR, getting the right people and having them stay with us. And this is pretty much universal, all over the place. And in our context, we need to realize that given that there is a short supply, they are not easy to replace. It takes time. It takes time because it's not just getting a person into the system, because you want to have this person aligned to your own goals, to the culture of the organization. I mean, a lot of effectiveness of individuals come by knowing others within the organization, and that takes time. So this is a strong reality. So we need to really focus on retaining the people, because if you let them go, you are not very sure that they're going to come back. So this becomes critical. So it's not only retaining them, but also engaging them in the organization in the context of having less or very little work. And of course, this goes back to the same problem, catch-22 of financial resources. And then, when it comes to financial, we have to figure out how we can quickly build back the patient volumes. So this is where it becomes very, very critical. And then when we build back the patient volumes, we also have to make sure that the patient care goals, and are essentially, I would say, three. One is the prime things to ensure staff safety. And this we can, I think there are enough and more protocols. I'm not going to get into that. Then how do we build patient trust in this new change norm? And that will be through safety protocols, awareness, and so on. And again, I'm sure you've had enough and more webinars talking about this. And the third one is that how can we make the patient flow more efficient? And this is an area where I will be spending time. And before I proceed further, I just want to state that this presentation is not going to be talking about solutions, which a lot of the clinical webinars on how to manage things in COVID situation was about, whether it is PPE or otherwise. But this presentation will be about developing a thought process, that could lead to, in my mind, good and lasting solutions. So again, going back to my starting slide, we should never let a good crisis go waste. So I'm going to throw a few ideas as to how we can deal with capacity reduction. I think now there's a unique opportunity, especially for those who don't have an appointment system, which I think would be a vast majority, of working on making the demand uniform so that we can, so we tried this. Within Aravind, we don't have an appointment system. We are a completely walk-in service. And with any walk-in service, there is lumping of patient arrival. So in our case in Madurai, we will have a huge crowd of patients when we open the hospital. These are patients who come from long distances. Now, then around 10 or 10:15, we would have another influx of patients. And pretty much by about 12:30 or 1, we have about 85–90% of that day's patients have come in. So we typically have a pretty lax afternoon, very few patients in the system. So we realized that, okay, going forward, we cannot have beyond a certain number of patients at any given point of time, and which is forcing us to schedule the patients. We're still not looking at an appointment system, but then we are looking at, can we spread out this demand into a uniform process? And towards that, the very first step was that what will be our capacity at any given hour if we have to follow all these norms of social distancing and decontamination and so on. And then what came as reality was that our capacity will be determined by the number of chairs in the waiting room. Now, if you had capacity for seating, say, 75 people, now if you have to keep the middle chair or the adjacent chair free, that is going to drop down to probably half of that. So we are now looking at what will be the situation if the demand became uniform from 7:30 to, say, 5 o'clock in the evening. And then to our surprise, what we realized was that if we succeed in making the demand uniform, our capacity will really not go down. We'll be able to cater to almost the same number of patients. So that was a big revelation to us, and I would think this may apply to most of you. Which means that we don't need to get into a situation where some of the larger hospitals by design are cutting down to 25% or 30% of their current volume, which would also mean that the revenues will go down by 70 to 75%. Now, these are hospitals which have already done this uniform distribution through an appointment system. So to me, this is an opportunity. I say it's an opportunity because changing patient behavior is not easy. But today you have an opportunity on a platter wherein the protocols and everything demands that you cannot handle more than a certain number of patients. And the patients recognize that, and they also don't want to be in a crowded place. So all of this is to our advantage. So can we use this to change patient behavior and thereby be able to serve the same number and also benefit by it? So the second idea that I want to throw is to recognize that our bottleneck now will not be the building, equipment, or staff. It will be the capacity, because of whatever the new protocol that is coming in. So one of the cardinal principles is that a bottleneck resource should never be idle or do unnecessary work. Okay, so here the bottleneck is the capacity. So the capacity that we have should not be wasted. So one way of looking at it is to look at patients always come with a problem. We call that as an episode. So they come with watering eyes or some foreign body or for a pair of glasses or for a cataract surgery. And then we may resolve it in one visit or we may resolve it in 4 visits. Today, I don't think we monitor this. So if you can pivot and start monitoring visits per episode and then work towards minimizing it, can you make it as a single visit? Like in our case, if a patient comes with cataract and has come ready to get operated, Then in our case, we would do all the investigations, admit the patient, operate the patient the following morning, and then the patient can go home. So we're able to actually do that on a single visit. But in certain situations, even for a pair of glasses, I've known hospitals where the protocol will require the patient to come 3 times. Which means the number of visits that you take to resolve an episode has got a direct bearing on how well your capacity is used. So this is a second thought I'm throwing for you to kind of ponder to see whether you can start look at your own practice and the protocols to bring this to play. The third idea is in some sense revolutionary, in some sense not. So can we take a fresh look at our workflow, protocols, policies, and everything to kind of see, to ask this question, does this have to happen in the hospital when the patient comes in? Or can it happen outside the hospital? And you'll recognize that this is already in play in a lot of other industries. Banks have done it beautifully. I'm sure many of you have not gone to a bank in the last decade or so. Certainly I haven't been. Because the bank has done very smartly, shifted everything onto the patient, to outside the bank. Drawing money or to make money transfers or looking at how much balance I have. For none of that, you need to go to the bank now. So they've leveraged technology to do that. The airlines have done the same. Railways are doing the same. So can we ask this question, what can we shift outside the hospital? Because I think these are all little things which would have an impact on the capacity. Can the registration be done outside? Can we have some kind of a chatbot or something like that which can take good history of the patient, which can automatically get populated to the medical records? Can all the insurance workup be done outside? Can the health education be shifted? And there are different techniques for doing that. So can we work towards engineering this shift? This idea of this thought process came to me when I got a chance of studying the practice in the US, where there are 2 retina specialists, and each specialist, when they are working on a full day, will see 110 patients. Okay, this is a retina practice. It's not a simple refractive error, this thing. And then every patient gets a OCT done, and more than half the patients will get an injection done as well. Okay, so in that practice, it is very interesting for them. Indication, a metric of failure is if they find a patient sitting in the waiting area. So they have so streamlined the work that there is no one sitting in the waiting room. They're all coming in, getting into one area or the other, and going out. And there, the average throughput time entering to the clinic to leaving the clinic is 45 minutes. And when I kind of went deeper into the process, all that I have listed here, can these things be done outside? Every one of them was being done outside. Okay, none of this was happening inside the hospital. And obviously, for those people to get 110 patients coming day in and day out, they have to have a very high level of patient satisfaction and engagement in an extremely competitive environment. So this is something which I think we should start exploring. A fourth idea is to looking at what I'm calling as the patient care cycle time. That is the time from registering to leaving the hospital. Can we minimize that? Because the less time your patient spends in the hospital means that much more capacity you have to deal with more patients. Okay, so this is a direct benefit both to the patient, because no patient wants to spend a lot of time in the hospital. So they would also like to leave soon. And then so it's like a win-win kind of a situation. So we can look at whether we can rationalize investigations, cross referrals, And wherever you need to do a cross-referral can be resolved e-consultation without moving the patient to go to another place. In all this, we have to realize whatever protocol rules that are there currently is all our doing. So it is not set in stone, and they all can be changed. So in this context, if you set some benchmark, let us say, for the sake of argument, a patient coming with a simple condition where no dilation is done or required, they should leave, let's say, in 45 minutes. With dilation, they should leave in an hour and 15 minutes. Suppose you establish some benchmarks. Then can we do a detailed root cause analysis, that's RCA, on every patient who exceeds this goal? Can we do a deep analysis of what caused it, and then address it for the next day? And oftentimes you may need to expand your capacity in some little area, maybe an extra equipment has to be bought, or you appoint another person or something like that. But these investments, I think, will pay back, in my mind, almost within a month or two, because this is kind of fiddling with some minor inputs, which will give back enormous returns by way of increased capacity. So this is the fourth idea of can we minimize the patient care cycle time. And the next one is, can we start exploring remote care, telemedicine, etc., which till now was something which many of us didn't take seriously. And in the time of COVID, I think quite a few people have started exploring this quite seriously. And I guess everyone is experimenting with their own version of this. I'm showing a slide, your image here, which may not be very clear. So I'm showing a larger version of the image. This is from a health system called as Kaiser Permanente. They're largely in California. And then if you look at the number of visits, it is staggering. At Aravind, we do see a large number of patients. We handle about 5 million outpatient visits, but we were very humbled when we saw these numbers. They are having about 148 million patient contacts each year through the system of hospitals. And then what was very interesting to us was that almost 2/3 of these contacts are digital or electronic or telehealth. And this could be a number of things. A patient wanting to see the lab results, to wanting something else. So they have come up with a very robust way of engaging patients digitally. And of course, in the US, it's slightly different context, but not a whole lot different, given that in India also pretty much everyone has got a mobile phone, and many of them have smartphones. And they're also witnessing a 30% growth year on year on video visits. So this telemedicine thing is something that is real. It is not something fancy or sci-fi. So people who are able to do this. So, and then part of this could also be shifting care to lower levels. Like say you have a diabetic retinopathy patient, say a mild case, so you're seeing them every year. So can you have the patient go to your primary care center if you have one? And then can use technology to deal with the patient right there. So all these ideas are going to help. I think if we can achieve by exploring these ideas a certain amount of efficiency, let's say I'm throwing a figure of 20-30%, which I think is quite conservative, because if we really work hard in this, we can almost double our capacity. I think within Aravind, I know for a fact that when we start working on this episode monitoring and cutting down, I know that in the specialty clinics like retina, glaucoma, and so on, the number of visits from the current pool of patients could almost come down to half. So you'll also recognize that the way I've described reducing the patient visits is not compromising on quality. We're just eliminating unnecessary visits or unnecessary examinations and so on. So on one hand, the quality is not compromised, but then you're having less number of patients or patients spending less time in the hospital. All of this has got a huge benefit to the patient, by way of increased patient satisfaction and reduced cost to the individual, to the patients. And then one big outcome of this is enhanced capacity for us to take in more patients. So, so I'm basically building a case that because of this COVID, if we do things right, with what we have, we can probably see 1.25 or 1.3 or 1.5 times the number of patients. And all of this would have a significant impact on the revenue as well. So the money that we lost, we should be able to make it up by the end of this year. Now, if we work smartly around this. Now, kind of going back to the demand side, what is unknown, probably what's on everyone's mind is, what will the demand rebound be? Now, will the patients come to the hospital? Will they not come to the hospital? Because now they have not had revenues, and many of the people have lost jobs or were not paid. So there are a lot of anxiety in our minds as to how the demand will rebound. Some of us may already have some experience if you started working for the last week or so. What we also don't know is what will be the patient's expectation with all this. Will they get more sensitive about decontamination protocols, social distancing, and will that become the new norm? All those things are unknown. And what is certain to me is that the outreach is not going to happen for several months. I don't think the governments will give us the permission to do this. So in this context, I had our IT department take a look at our, we started seeing patients since last Monday. And then this is what the figures showed in the first 3 or 4 days data. So basically, I told them to find out the number of patients we saw in the month of May in 2019, and I took that as our norm or normal, as 100%. And against that, what has been the patient footfalls post-COVID, starting to see patients. And you'll find this is something which I totally expected, and I was quite pleased that my thought process got validated. You'll recognize that in the vision centers, within the first day or two, the volumes ramped up to almost 66% of our normal. The secondary hospitals, it was hovering around 32, 33%. And we have one hospital which is in between secondary and tertiary, where the number was around 25% or so. And the tertiary hospitals, it's around 11%, 12% of a normal volumes. Like in Madurai, we see close to 3,000 outpatients. Now we're seeing around 300, 350 or so. It's increasing day by day. No, but then what is coming very clear is that when there are challenges around affordability and access, it is a local facility that becomes more attractive or accessible. As a result, the vision centers we're seeing the demand rebound happening very, very quickly. And this to me is an insight that we have. So can we innovate on the demand side? Again, I'm throwing a few challenges. Because the community, you will realize, fights for a lot of things. They fight for electricity, they fight for water supply to the villages, or they fight for a bus route or whatever. So in the same way, can we make the community organizations as the primary owner of eye care problems in the community? And today, we own the problem. I mean, in many hospitals, they own it to the extent that they would go make all the publicity, they will do all the arrangements for doing an eye care. So can you flip that around to kind of shift the burden onto the community and the community organizations that they become the primary owner. If there is somebody that cannot see in the community, they should do something about it. Same way, can the school teachers do something about a student who's not able to see well? And today, the organizations which are into school eye health will recognize the challenges they have in getting permissions and so on. Same with industries. Industries employs people, and many of the employees need glasses. And then can the industries make sure that their employees have good eyesight? And all of these things are to the benefit of the industry or the school or the community if everyone can see well. So it's a question of shifting that ownership to them, and this will take some work. And we have had great success in doing this. Like, for example, the very first time we went to Majida courts to screen their employees, there was a lot of resistance. They were not willing. But somehow we went to the very highest level and got the permission and did the screening and gave them all free glasses. And there the work requires near vision, and most of the employees were above 40 because it's a very old company. And then within 3 months, Majida courts realized that the productivity of these highly unionized, difficult employees jumped up by 13%. So when this happened, they came to us running saying that, can you please do the screening in all our other factories in other locations? And then once the word got around within textile industry, it was very easy to get entry for doing screening and giving glasses to the patients. Same way we were able to win over some schools, but it's all work in progress. Because once this is done, we can build an effective referral network, from this group. And then that by itself should keep a steady flow of patients coming to us. So the other issue of how much you charge and all of that, it's a separate discussion. But then I think we can build a very, very robust, probably even a better network than doing outreach work. And then what is very clear is that we will gain by investing in primary eye care or vision centers. And then we have a lot of evidence to show that. Like, for instance, with about 80 vision centers, 79 to be precise, we are now handling about 7 lakh outpatient visits a year. And then that vision center area, about CSR of 6,000 comes out of the vision center referrals. This is a graph going back about 35 years, wherein you can see the blue line, which I'm showing here, is the ICAM, which grew for about till about 2000, but kind of stayed plateau in spite of putting a lot of efforts. But then we had actively engaged community in organizing camps, in referring patients to us, working with industries and so on. So as a result, this pink line, which are walk-in free patients who come to the free hospital, has steadily increased, and in the year 2009 or 10, the lines crossed, which means we get many more surgeries from patients walking in directly to the hospital than coming through ICANs. And then overall, the impact of this changed behavior of patients coming in directly, our paying patients growth has been even more robust. So I think in this current situation, it is being very much accentuated because of the access challenges. So in conclusion, the take-home messages are, one, to realize that the current pandemic by itself is not going to change the eye care needs scenario. The cataracts will continue to exist, so will the refractive errors or any of the other conditions. So that the demand base is not going to change at all. It will continue to exist. A second realization is to recognize that whatever challenges that we have now, on demand side, patient access side, all of that is universal. It is affecting everyone. All healthcare providers, all industries, everyone. So it is something quite universal. No, so recognizing that feeling victimized and complaining is not going to help at all. No, so it is really for us to innovate and stay relevant. Thank you very much. So there is one comment, not a question, from Madhu from Srikiran. Again, he has given another innovative idea that we are able to maintain capacity just by not allowing any attendees. This is a good approach, because in our estimate, for every patient there is 1.3 attenders. Just eliminating them from entering into the clinic area itself increases the chance for social distancing and other requirements. Counseling can also be done online. That's definitely true. There is one question from Vinu Sudhir, which says, post any surgery, if symptom of COVID is detected in the patient, what do you think will be the consequence? So this is a little bit out of my scope of my talk. And I think here the consequence will be largely dictated by the regulations. And what I heard recently was that they might ask you to close the facility for 2 days for doing decontamination. This is what I heard as the most current this thing, which I think is probably the right thing to do as well. Will this pandemic will affect future practice of ophthalmologists? How the upcoming few years after pandemic, especially elective surgeries? In my mind, I think after passage of some time, there would be a slightly new normal because, like I said earlier, on the demand side, things are not going to change. Cataracts will continue to occur, so will be need for glasses and so on. So from that point of view, there will be no change in the scenario. But then, because of this condition, for some time there would be a different way of working will be mandated. When that would end, we don't know. So to the extent that we get ready for that, there should be no change in the situation. Like, can we develop some technology also and system patients can? Exactly. I think this whole notion of can we leverage technology for kind of providing care. I think I think fundamentally, if we can use technology to kind of provide care which doesn't need to happen in the hospital, or activities you don't need to happen in the hospital. Now, if you can mature technology at that level, I think that would be a huge way of being prepared for similar situation. Arun Sethi, why not develop a uniform software for all members? Yeah, so this would I think all these kind of things will happen. Yeah. So I think in my mind, the industry is a lot more prepared. When I say industry, the IT industry is a lot more prepared to do it. And probably the best method of doing it is to form some kind of a task force amongst the practitioners so that we are able to give them the right specification scenarios, for the application. Otherwise, the IT developers develop something and then we find it doesn't fit our needs. But I think this will emerge by itself over time. Yeah, can we shift some of the activities? Definitely, that's something which I mentioned as well. How to avoid unnecessary patient visits to eye health. So this is, I think, can be done quite scientifically, how to avoid unnecessary patient visits. I think there are 2 or 3 approaches. One is to internally focus about your own protocols. Because I clearly remember visiting a hospital, wherein to get a cataract surgery, the patient typically had to make about 5 or 6 visits as per their protocol. Because on day 1, there's a diagnosis of cataract, then they're asked to come back for lab examinations. Then they're asked to come back when the results come out, to fix up a date for the surgery. And so it's at least 4 visits in that setup. So that is completely the organization's protocol. I think that's one area to look at. And the other area to look at is that, are we adding value when a patient comes and visits us? Are we doing it for the patient's benefit, or are we doing it more for our own satisfaction? I think once you get information on that, you can rationalize the number of visits that is required. In recognition to the reduced capacity, do you recommend patient triage? Absolutely. And it would be ideal if the triage can happen outside the hospital. This is where technology can help, or this is where like having a vision center or a primary eye care center can help, wherein they only send you the cases that needs to come to the hospital. And like I said, a concrete example, in our vision centers, we handle roughly about 7 lakh visits a year, through the 80 vision centers. From that, less than 10% of the patients are referred to us for surgery or advanced care. So you can imagine the huge benefit that we get. If those 7 lakh patients with simple conditions came and clogged the system. So technology is there today for us to be able to do this. So Madhu has also made an observation that single practitioner recovering faster than larger hospitals. But this is completely to do with access. Smaller practitioners or single practitioners typically have patients coming from their own neighborhood, which means easy and quick access. So that is very true. So in our case, we'll have to translate this by opening primary care centers. Parikshit, thank you. There is one question which is inadequate. What are the parameters we should follow at vision center? Now, if it is about clinical parameters, I think there's a webinar coming up on Friday, which should answer a lot of these questions. What about camps? Can we conduct? Yeah, so on the camp front, I think we really have to wait for the regulation, to do that, and then have a comfort level that the spread is really flattened and reduced and stopped. Otherwise, we'll be also aggravating the situation, kind of laying the ground for a rebound or whatever. And I think at that point of time, we can take a look at what is the best way of conducting the camp. But my basic plea is that India started eye camps more than 100 years ago. People like Mathura Das and Rambo and others conducted camps. My plea is that we should not be conducting camps 100 years from now. Because today we have hospitals in accessible locations. It's a question of creating access, changing patient behavior. So I think one in-between stage would be what I described. If you can develop a very robust community-based referral mechanism, you will start getting patients coming and getting care. Now, because if you look at all the developed countries, you take Germany, Sweden, whatever, they don't have eye camps, and they have more eye care happening than what happens in India. So we need to be also thinking, how do we use or leverage this kind of a forced situation to start working towards that. So while we may continue camps for some more time, I think part of our effort should also go in that direction. At this moment, we're all affected by industries also. So this is something we'll have to wait and see. This is the question that I talked about. We're not fully certain about the demand rebound. But from what we are seeing from now is that as long as access is good, patients are coming back. So each one of you, if you look at your own patients from where they are coming, big hospital or small hospital, you will realize that they're all coming from the local areas. So as of now, we don't know the burden or the impact of the economic downturn on demand, which I think will only be felt when it becomes fully normal. But we should anticipate that it could have a slightly dampening effect, which is where the whole efficiency part becomes critical. In the sense, if you can earn the same revenues with lesser effort, by having patients come fewer times and so on, to that extent, your bottom line improves. Meenakshi, how can outreach team utilize? Yeah, this is a good question, Meenakshi, from Udaipur. Like I said, can this team start working with the communities to build up a referral network? And we had done that in the past. Many years back when Aravind started out working with the communities, we did a lot of work to establish community-based referral network. And we used our own outreach team to do that. So I would really encourage you to explore that. Madhu, medical, paramedical education, clinical training in the short-term scenario. This might get a little bit challenging, especially on the clinical training part. But I think what we can do in this breather time is to kind of reflect or review our own training curriculum and process to see things that have to improve. Like we are now completely taking a deep look at our curriculum and then shifting completely to competency-based training, something that Orbis also pioneered a few years ago, wherein the training itself becomes much more tight and much more efficient, wherein the people who come out of it become much better trained. So doing that kind of homework or preparatory work, when you're not able to do the clinical training, is probably a good use in the short term. Hopefully, this will all change in the next few months or so. Being a small individual eye surgeon in Mumbai, how to meet these challenges? I mean, like Madhu observed, you should anticipate a quicker rebound of your patients coming back to you, because I'm sure you would recognize that most of your patients come from the local neighborhood. So you should anticipate that your patients will come back sooner than for large institutions like us. For us to get back to our volume of 3,000 probably will take almost a year or so. So we are at a greater disadvantage. Are the vision centers available as franchise models? So this is a little bit out of the context of this talk. So maybe if you can send me an email, we can talk about that. Can reduce workload? How do we keep the staff engaged? This is a pretty good question. So depending upon your setup, probably usually when you're running a hospital, there is a lot of development work that needs to be done, which doesn't get done because of the day-to-day operational pressures. So I think you can use this few months or the time on each day when you have a little bit of a slack to take on those developmental activities, which could be training to maintenance or what on. So that probably is the way. So a good way to do it is to make a complete list of all the development activities and systematically allocate resource, with time frame. And I think that's the best you can. I think that will have the twin goal of keeping the staff engaged, doing useful work, and also get some of this development work done. Munir, when we can start cataract operations and what measures need to be done. So I'm not going to this. There is a clinical aspect to this question, which I won't get into because that's not my core area. And I'm sure there will be other webinars which address this. I know some happened and some will be definitely happening. So at this point of time, we are a little bit governed by the regulations. And I know in India, they have recently announced that from a government of India level, that elective procedures can begin. So the respective states have to operationalize that. So I know that for all practical purposes, many of the hospitals have started taking on routine work. Do you say that we need to avoid reduced comprehensive examination? Yeah, so this is a call that you may have to take at a local level, because I think the reality is that some of your own staff may not be cooperative, for doing certain procedures which are in close proximity to the patients. So this is a call that you will have to come into consensus within the organization. But of course, what we should do and what we can do is to make sure that your staff are fully educated on the importance of personal protective gear. Because many of this, because it is so uncomfortable to work with a mask on the outpatient, especially when the weather is hot. So there is tendency not to comply with that. So I think focusing on that, I think would go a long way as we start getting into more comprehensive procedures. What has been your biggest gain in increasing? So we are yet to get the benefit. So internally, we are challenging ourselves to start working on whatever I shared with you, which I also shared with our internal team. So one big gain would be that we have now developed a software package to smoothen the scheduling of patients, so that the inflow happens throughout the day. So we have put up gateways for patients calling in or through emails or things like that. So that I think will be a big gain for us, in the sense that if we're able to succeed in doing this, which we will know in the next month or so, we should be able to work at almost our full capacity and see no revenue reduction. So to maintaining the revenue today for larger hospitals by itself is a single largest gain. And then as we start working upon increased efficiencies, we should be able to, in fact, increase the revenues. Can follow patient screening.
I'm sorry, sir. I'm
yes,
disturbing you in between. So can I read the questions, because I guess a lot of people cannot see the questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we're also close to the end of the hour, so I'll let you to moderate as to when we should close.
You can follow patient screening and monitoring done at home with with smartphones and virtual reality visual fields.
The answer is yes, but the technology is still evolving. In fact, Shankar Nethralaya has done some very innovative stuff, telling patients to go stand in front of a mirror and then use the rear camera, which has got better resolution, to take an image, and then attach it and send it through a WhatsApp message for teleconsultation. And then they showed many examples of where that really worked and they could really help the patient. So I think these are all the thought processes that we should work on.
So if we move to a technology-driven care, then how do we address the human psychology interface?
I think if we develop technology in a sensitive and conscious manner, you could kind of use technology to in a way that it benefits the patient, wherein the patient really appreciates that aspect of the technology. Like, for example, today none of us complain that we don't see a cashier in the bank to get our money. We are more than happy to go to an ATM to draw the money. So it is about how we craft this technology so that the human interaction can actually become even better. So this is left to our imagination, I would think.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Priya is asking, because the pandemic is global, so obviously it has affected the international funding. So what is the impact of COVID on international funding?
So this is a good question. I think because in many countries, a lot of the eye care happens through international funding, through agencies like Sightsaver, CBM, Orbis, and so on. So because, and those industries, those organizations depend upon grants coming into them from other agencies and also governments. So now we know that a lot of the governments are completely out of reserves, and some of them are even going bankrupt. This is also happening for some of the industries as well. So my prediction is that there could be some dampening of resources coming in. So the few organizations which have an endowment may be able to live through it, but for a large part, I think we should be gearing up for a certain reduction. But I think the individual organization should realize that their own communities can support them. Like in India, pretty much every organization has the potential to become financially self-reliant.
And when will we see the new normal in the future of eye care?
What will be the new normal?
What will be? Yeah,
the future
sorry, not the when.
I somehow don't think it will be a lot different, but I think because of the pressures that are being brought in, I would think the telemedicine and those kind of technologies would take much more of a center stage. I would also anticipate the governments also will more aggressively push those technologies and hopefully create an enabling environment for them to thrive. We might also see patients being a little bit more sensitive about how care is given, with respect to decontamination and so
on. Is it possible to do cataract surgery in this COVID period?
I think so. Yeah, I think the government itself has said yes, we can do.
And so do we need to do, do we need to do COVID tests before we do the surgeries?
I would refrain from answering this question because one, it's clinical in nature, so it's kind of outside my purview. My only hope is that it doesn't amount to that, because it would add to an unnecessary huge financial cost to the system, regardless of who pays for it. Because these tests cost close to 5,000 rupees. And then we know that the positive rate is in single-digit percentages.
And when do you think we can commence the outreach activities, especially in the rural areas? Miss Prema.
Prema, when do you think we can? It is very difficult to guess, Prema, on this, because I think this will be driven largely by government allowing us to do that. Because the outreach, I think by design, requires that people congregate in high density, which is what we have to avoid now. So it will be quite some time before that can happen.
And is mass screening safe under all possible precautions at this time? Ms. Dipali.
Yeah. Dipali is asked against the same question about outreach. Mass screening basically is outreach. So today the answer would be no. Yeah. Today the smart thing to do would be to build referral mechanism from the community.
Mr. Kuldeep has asked, can you please explain the role of Vision Center in the world with COVID-19 and after it? And at the time when the resources are limited, how an organization would invest further on teleophthalmology and related infra? What are the different ways to deal with it in going forward?
So I think with the slide which I showed about the demand rebound being the highest in Vision Centers, to me, signifies the critical role that Vision Centers would play, not just for COVID. I think we're having this demand, the high demand happening in Vision Centers, or higher demand, largely due to the access issue. So even beyond COVID, just the notion of providing care to everyone, I think vision centers will be most critical. And then in terms of resources, today pretty much everyone is having IT, some form of IT or the other, and they're not expensive. In relation to setting up a vision center, the cost of putting in the IT infrastructure would be in the order of about 4 or 5% or so as investment. So we're basically talking about a laptop or a PC or something like that, and broadband. That's all you need for telemedicine. You don't need any fancy equipment. Rest of it is all workflow. So to me, that's not a real challenge. Yeah.
So there are many more questions. I'll just read out this one more, which seems, which is related to Arvind. Does Arvind has any existing technology to provide teleconsultation, and can Arvind help smaller hospitals working in the tribal or rural areas to build the technology to provide teleconsultation? This is Mr. Anand's question.
Anand, yeah, I don't see it. Okay. So the answer is yes. So Arvind does have a telemedicine application, which is now predominantly deployed in the vision centers, which are run by ophthalmic technicians. It is largely software driven and using simple webcam and things like that. So the backbone is the electronic medical record, and this is available for other institutions to use as well. And as a matter of fact, Bangladesh, Tripura, Chhattisgarh, and this is already being used in quite a few other places as well.